So would you kindly welcome them? We are going to talk about wrestling with God in old age, and young age and into old age. Lloyd Geering is 92 years of age. His wife says he really behaves like a 62-year-old, which is some testimonial, I might say, from a wife. Because usually wives say, oh, he's such an old dag, really, dragging his feet around the place. So that's a tremendous testimonial today. So I think since you're all here and wanting him to speak, I should shut up, don't you think? Yeah, sure. And I will. I have a book to read here, and I'll sit down and start reading it if you like, but I really brought it in to read you a section. It might be relevant to read you a little bit of it later on, but for a start, I think we should pause for our guest to speak and hear what he has to say. So in introducing him, let me tell you just a little bit about him that I know about him. First of all, he's written many books, and in these last many years, he's been a leading author, a leading writer in the field of bringing people out of their shall I say, unbelievable religion into a religion and a way of thinking which might be more in keeping with the 21st century. But he began it in the 20th century, as you might imagine. He and I met, in fact, back in the 1960s. So I knew him, I've known of his exploits since that date. Although, oddly enough, I think we've only met once in the intervening years. So it was a great pleasure for me to be able to invite him back for this particular weekend. He was, when I first knew him, he was the professor of Old Testament studies at Knox College, Knox Theological College, I think it was called, in Dunedin. He had a little bit of a problem at that time, and he was a member of the professor within the Presbyterian Church of New Zealand, and they seemed to dislike a few of the things that he'd been saying, and they put him on a charge of heresy. And there was a huge kerfuffle took place in New Zealand. And some of you would know about that. In fact, I know that some of you still have the whole report on that very peculiar episode in the Presbyterian Church's life, as well as probably in his. I think he was acquitted of the charge, but he ought not to have been. It probably would have been better had he been well and truly told that he was out of order, and it might have brought everybody up to a bigger shock than just letting him off the hook. But in any case, he moved aside and went to become the professor of religious studies at, is it called Victoria University?
That's it.
Yeah, Victoria University in Wellington, where he's remained until I think he probably retired some stage from that post. But even since then, he's been very much a writer and a publisher of his views. And some of those views you'll find quite in keeping with what some people at St Michael's have been hearing here for quite some time as well. He is a fellow of the International Scholars of the Jesus Seminar, and you've heard about that body from me. And in that role, he was also played a major international. He's been a national presence as he have been trying to speak about, well, what are we going to make of religion, of faith, of all those things for the 21st century. So with that inadequate introduction, I'd like you now to hear Sir Lloyd Geering. Welcome to St Michael's and welcome to Sage. Yeah.
Thank you, Francis, and good morning, everyone. When Francis first invited me to come and speak and told me about Sage, and I asked him what I should talk about, and he said, oh, well, how did you get to 92? And I said, well, I don't know, and I haven't any... Who's here is over 90 anyway? Well... I must be the oldest one here. Well,
I'm on the verge of 90.
on the verge of 90. Good. Well, I haven't any recipe. When people ask me, how do you manage to live that way? And I said, well, if you want to know how, the best thing is to choose your parents very carefully. My father lived to 100, and so I suppose I have to thank the genes for being as it was. Mind you, he only lived to 100 to get the Queen's message, and having got the Queen's message, there wasn't much point in carrying on, really. So, so I said to Francis, it's more interesting to the sage, perhaps, if I talk about some of the things I wrote in an autobiography, which I called Wrestling with God. And I called it that because you all know it comes from the biblical story of Jacob wrestling overnight with an unseen assailant. He was returning to his own land, and they'd got to the Jabbok River. I've been there to the very place, by the way, where this legend, of course that is a legend, where this legend, and I must say today it's a very dirty, polluted stream in Jordan. But nevertheless, it's good to see the hills all around. And I chose that because, in a sense, that's what I have felt all through my life, that I was actually doing, right up to the present. Not all through my life, I must admit, because I wasn't brought up in the church. Certainly I had some Sunday school training, and that was in Warrnambool. I spent 4 years in Warrnambool at a very impressionable age, 9 to 13. I developed an Australian accent, which I never entirely lost, much to my chagrin when I returned to New Zealand, where I was the laughing stock of the school. So that was the sum total of my religious education, and all through my high school days and first year at university, I had absolutely no connection with the church whatsoever. But in 1937, which is my second year at university, everything seemed to change. Now, it's very hard to put your finger on why it changed. Looking back, I can see that I had up until that point, I had no idea where I was going. I just carried on. I was pretty good at school, so I just carried on the kind of things and had a vague idea I would have a career in mathematics. I did my master's degree in mathematics. And but it had me wondering what to make of life. And because of a number of quite incidental things, just chance events, someone asking me for an evening meal at the family and going off to church afterwards, which was their practice, and then his inviting me into the student Christian movement, and a whole lot of chance events, I found myself caught up in a kind of framework with which I could relate everything in my life. And what Christianity did for me from that point onwards was to supply me with a set of stories and a set of values with which I could direct and have a vision, direct my life and have a vision of where I was going. There I was at the beginning of that year, having no connection with the church whatsoever, and at the end of the year, I was offering myself to be trained for the ministry. Now, some of my evangelical friends, they were friends at a distance, some of my evangelical friends would say I had been converted. But if you had said, had I given my life to the Lord Jesus, I would have run a mile, because that kind of language was completely foreign to me. So I trained for the ministry. And I must say, at the time when I was trained, the theological hall that I went to